It's time for Old Fart Rants and Old Face Bloat Stan Seder suddenly care about dead people in Buffalo and dead children, Part 4. Let's keep this train rolling and look at Virginia. Some of my previous data on Virginia in 2020 of the 344 arrestees for homicide, 63.95% of them were black. Of the 528 homicide victims, 66.28% of them were black. In 2019, 428 murders, and 253 of the victims, 59.11%, were black. And of the offenders, 280 of them, 65.42%, were black. I'm going to post all the transcript of this whole thing over at Rumble, too. So, same crap, different Democrat dunghole. Asians are not slaughtering Asians in Virginia. I wonder why. Maybe it's because they have two parents in the house and they're not abusing drugs and they haven't been taught racism since they were born. The man's going to hold you down. So if you look through the homicide data in Virginia, and I've got it all down for many years. A lot of black on black homicide. Less than 20% of Virginia is black. And 6.9% is Asian. And if you look at, you don't see Asians slaughtering Asians in the hood at the same rate. Not anywhere near it. I said same rate for you Democrats who don't know what statistics are. Now let us look at the number of arrests in Virginia for murder / non-negligent manslaughter, kidnapping / abduction, rape, which includes forcible rape, forcible sodomy, and sexual assault with an object, which means a woman could rape a man. Robbery and aggravated assault, remember those. In 2017 and 2018, the number of arrests for those crimes in Virginia, 15,513. Of those arrests, 53.34% of the arrestees were black. And the same data for 2019-2020 for those crimes, there were 16,298 arrests. Of those arrests in Virginia, 53.09% of the arrestees were black. Good for Virginia, they made more arrests for violent crime. In 2017, for you people who care about the children, in 2017 there were 74 persons aged 19 or under murdered in Virginia because they changed the age categories. They had to do it differently in 2018. There were 13 children aged 17 or less murdered in 2018. In 2019-2020, there were 86 children aged 18, less than 18 murdered in Virginia. Say their names, dumbass. Now let us look at the problem areas of Virginia. I've done this before. The big-time problem cities, they all vote Democrat by large margins on the state level, federal level, etc. Richmond, Roanoke, Norfolk, Danville, Newport News, Petersburg, Hampton, and Portsmouth. They had a homicide rate from 2018 to 2020 of 19.647. The U.S. rate was 5.533 per 100,000. The homicide rate in Virginia outside those cities for 2018 to 2020 was 3.189. So it's the whitest pro-Trump counties in Virginia are dragging the homicide rate down. It's the diverse areas run by Democrats where blacks are slaying blacks and there's just general hysteria and Black Lives Matter and defund the police and, well, there you go. Because nobody in their right mind would live in Richmond, Virginia. Trust me. If half of the crap that went on these Democrat dungholes happened in, say, rural western Iowa where they were armed with, I hate to get off script, armed with Molotov cocktails ready to go down and do something, I think it might get taken care of before the police even got there. But it's a different culture in these Democrat cities, if you've unfortunately been there. Now, the number of arrests for those crimes that I mentioned, murder, kidnapping, abduction, rape, kidnapping / abduction, rape, which included several things, robbery and aggravated assault in those cities, Richmond, Roanoke, Norfolk, Danville, Newport News, Petersburg, Hampton, and Portsmouth. And I'm a little hoarse too, by the way. Those crimes, 2017 and 2018 in those cities, 4,938 arrests. Those same crimes in 2019 and 2020, 4,110 arrests. So the arrests went down quite a bit. Ferguson effect? Did they intimidate the police into pulling back and saying, we're not going to be proactive, we're going to be reactive, which means less arrests, despite violent crime and homicide going through the roof in those cities? This is what Black Lives Matter wants. They want the police intimidated into submission, and then it'll be easier for them to get their way. They want a lawless society. Let's take a gander at our fine nation's capital, the District of Columbia, which is a uber Democrat town. You may not find another area of the U.S. that is more Democrat-leaning. D.C. homicide rate 2018 to 2020, 25.704 per 100,000. D.C. homicide rate 2015 to 2017, 20.17 per 100,000. Way above the national rate. It's getting worse. If you peruse D.C.'s annual reports, you will see homicide is becoming an increasing problem over the past decade. Washington, D.C. arrests 2016 to 2018. You will see slightly different categories in other jurisdictions. The total arrests 2016 to 2018 for aggravated assault, assault on police officer, ADW, assault with a dangerous weapon, homicide, kidnapping, robbery, sex abuse, and sex offenses, 9,272. Those same criminal acts, 2019 to 2021, only 6,127 arrests. Ferguson effect? Look at how arrests plummeted. I believe the Beltway reptilians and the slime that reside in D.C. intimidated police into less proactive policing. Ergo, they're not in the crime-riddled districts and neighborhoods where most of the violent crime is occurring. Let's look at another Washington, namely Washington State. And again, I'll post this transcript on Rumble. YouTube's comment video description doesn't allow me to get that long. Now let's look at Washington State. Keep in mind, Washington State is about 4.3 or 4.4% black. Washington arrests for murder, rape, sodomy, sexual assault with an object, aggravated assault, kidnapping, and robbery, 2017 to 2018, 18,546. Of those arrests, 22.57% of the arrestees were black. And for those of you who care about the children, 48 children less than 18 years of age were murdered in Washington State 2017-2018. I could not find data on the race of homicide victims in Washington State. Washington arrests for murder, those same criminal acts I mentioned just seconds ago. The arrests went slightly up, 18,985, but the homicides in Washington spiked. Of those 18,985 arrests, 22.55% of the arrestees were black. 29 children were murdered in Washington State 2019 to 2020. Jefferson and King counties, the two most pro-Hillary, pro-Biden counties in Washington. Arrests for murder, rape, sodomy, sexual assault with an object, aggravated assault, kidnapping, and robbery, 2017 to 2018, 5,392 arrests. And then in 2019 and 2020, it went down to 5,316 arrests. Slightly lower. Yet crime is not going down. Arrests for those crimes in Seattle, according to the Washington State Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs, in Seattle, those same crimes yielded 2,430 arrests 2019 to 2020, but in 2017 and 2018, it was 3,317. As you can see, arrests were down slightly in those Democrat-dominated counties, but up in the state overall. Violent crime and especially homicide were up in Seattle 2019-2020 relative to the prior 2 years, yet arrests went down in those Democrat counties, especially Seattle. Is Black Lives Matter responsible for the spike in homicide? How many extra black-on-black homicides did they cause? How many homicides overall are they responsible for because they tried to gin up the great unwashed and in chess the pawns always go first to riot enough to get the police department mothballed and get free stuff courtesy of folks like me who actually work? I think we have a slight Ferguson effect in Jefferson and King counties overall, and especially in Seattle. The police are arresting far fewer criminals because they have been intimidated into being reactionary rather than proactive. This is one of the many reasons I own several firearms, even though this is unlikely in my area because it is 95+% white and we don't have fatherless children running wild in the streets. But that's one of the reasons I own firearms. If the police aren't around, I can and will defend myself. Let's do another one, Colorado. I'm not going to look at specific counties unless, of course, Denver is its own county. I will look at that one, but for the rest of them, because I'd have to tally every single municipality, other states with interactive crime reports allow you to, such as Pennsylvania, to tally a county at a time. And in Colorado, you can't do that. I have to go look up all the little municipalities, and I'm not going to do that. I do have some salient information, and of those of you who have an IQ above room temperature, unlike Old Fart Rants and the vacuous divorcee Stan Seder, those of you who do have an IQ above room temperature, this won't be news to you. From 2016 to 2018, there were 71,172 violent crimes in Colorado. Of the 26,289 arrestees for violent crime, 20.74% of them were black. Of the 523 arrestees for murder, 31.35% of them were black. In 2016 to 2018 in Colorado, of the 638 murder victims, 20.84% of them were black. 71 children were murdered in Colorado 2016 to 2018. Say their names, dumbasses. From 2019 to 2021, there were 83,076 violent crimes in Colorado. Of the 28,518 arrestees for violent crime, 21.53% of the arrestees were black. Of the 587 arrestees for murder in Colorado 2019 to 2021, 25.04% of the arrestees were black. From 2019 to 2021 in Colorado, there were 89 children murdered. Say their names, Democrats. Say their names. From 2019 to 2021 in Colorado, of the 894 criminal homicide victims, 22.81% of those victims were black. Keep in mind, Colorado is only 4.6% black. In addition, when you see the term white, that includes Hispanic Latino. Colorado is not separating non-Hispanic whites from everyone else. Now let us look at the biggest pile of excrement. One of the most pro-Biden, pro-Hillary areas in Colorado, namely Denver County. From 2016 to 2018 in Denver County, there were 16,310 violent crimes cataloged. 6,614 arrests were made in connection with those offenses, and 34.66% of those arrested were black. Of the 147 arrestees for murder in Denver County 2016 to 2018, 48.97% of them were black. Of the 178 criminal homicide victims in Denver County 2016 to 2018, 36.51% of them were black. 16 children were murdered in Denver County in that time frame. Say their names. From 2019 to 2021 in Denver County, there were 20,191 violent crimes cataloged. Big increase. 7,484 arrests were made in connection with those offenses, and 34.7% of them of the arrestees were black. Of the 194 arrestees for murder in Denver County 2019 to 2021, 40.72% of them were black. Of the 261 criminal homicide victims in Denver County 2019 to 2021, 36.78% of them were black. 30 children were murdered in Denver County 2019 to 2021. 30 children. Say their names. Keep in mind, Denver County is 9.8% black. Violent crime and homicide surged in Denver County 2019 to 2021 relative to the prior 3 years, but arrests did not surge to the same extent. Ferguson effect? Our police officers in Colorado, and especially Denver, pulling back because they don't want to risk their lives and livelihood by performing proactive police work. Have they become reactionary instead of proactive? We've seen this movie before, haven't we? I do maintenance on a lot of fancy machines, and trust me, it is worth it in the long run to be proactive and not reactive. This is the America the Democrat Party wants you to live in. They want to turn the United States, entire U.S. into Chicago or Oakland, where virtually everyone lives in a crummy apartment like Stan Seder does, and the police likely won't be available until after the assault or shootout is long finished. By intimidating the police into being reactionary instead of proactive, the great unwashed that folks like Maxine Waters gets worked into a tizzy while she watches afar from a McMansion in her mostly white neighborhood. The great unwashed that folks like Maxine Waters gets worked into a tizzy will find it easier to intimidate America into doing their bidding. That's what all the riots in Portland, the Bay Area, Denver, Minneapolis, et al. Right after the 2016 election were all about. Intimidation. That's what the burning of hundreds of buildings in Minneapolis, smash and grabs in California, riots in Baltimore, Philly, and many other urban Democrat dungholes were all about. Intimidation. It had nothing to do with civil rights. It had everything to do with a test run to see how much they can get away with. I will say it again. The most violent cities, and I have cataloged this over and over and over. See the links in the video description. I will say it again. The most violent cities in America are diverse. They have lots of fatherless children. They have lots of working age folks taking a break from the labor force. Lots of folks on food stamps. Lots of black on black homicide. And they vote Democrat. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.